2 of every 3 deaths in U.S. auto racing occurred at short tracks. These tracks have been slow to embrace changes that have saved lives in racing's major leagues. Most short track owners have not mandated head and neck restraints or other safety features to their cars. Much like NASCAR's reaction to Dale Earnhardt's death, the smaller venues have responded to individual tragedies. But unlike NASCAR, short tracks haven't made sweeping safety changes. Most smaller tracks cannot afford to make the changes. But this also results in higher insurance costs for the tracks that are passed along to the drivers. Of at least 523 racing deaths since 1990, 53% have been at short tracks. That has climbed in the last 5 years to about 70%. And short tracks are also where most U.S. racing takes place. 32% of the deaths in the last 25 years were at drag strips. The number of racing deaths annually appears to have dropped in recent years from an average of more than 20 to about 15 over the past 5 full years. There were at least 40 deaths in 2001 alone. No one in racing keeps track of how many people die, so it's possible the count doesn't include all fatalities. And when it comes to a teenage tragedy song, the idea of a stock car race so fast-paced that the death of the driver was left a mystery was very appealing for Ray Peterson and Jeff Barry, as we enter the second week of
Splatter Platter September.
We take a look into Ray Peterson's 1960 hit,
Alone in the chapel, she can hear him cry.
Hello to all you race car enthusiasts, and welcome on back to Heard It in a Love Song, the show where we race to the past to find the history of a love song we all know and love. My name is Richard Hunt, and this week we tell Laura we love her as we dig into the background of the story behind that song.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
We start our story on April 23rd. Now, the year is a bit tricky because there are so many articles that state the year is either 1935 or 1939. But regardless of the year, it is April 23rd in Denton, Texas, where we meet up with Herbert and Meredith Craw. These two just welcomed to the world Raymond August Craw. Now, Herbert and Meredith would not stay a happy couple for much longer, and when Ray was very young, the two were divorced. And not too long after that, Meredith would begin seeing and subsequently end up marrying Harvey Bernard Peterson, with both Meredith and a young Raymond taking on the last name of Peterson. Ray Peterson was a normal, happy-go-lucky, adventurous child until he contracted polio at age 14. Polio is a highly infectious disease caused by the polio virus. It invades the nervous system and can cause total paralysis in a matter of hours. 1 in 200 infections leads to irreversible paralysis, usually in the legs, and among those paralyzed, 5 to 10% die when their breathing muscles become immobilized. The doctors told him he would never walk again without braces or crutches. Recalls Ray Peterson's third wife, Claudia. You tell Ray Peterson something like that, and he was out to prove you wrong. However, the change in quality to young Ray's lifestyle was drastic. He was a sports guy before he contracted polio. He wasn't even thinking about singing. He thought it was for sissies, Claudia would say. During his lengthy course of treatment, a chance opportunity changed his mind. There he was in the Warm Springs Foundation, and since his relationship with sports was dead in the water, he ended up singing. More specifically, he sang White Christmas over the PA system. The patients at the Warm Springs Foundation were brought great joy by his singing, so he started rolling around the halls and singing in his wheelchair. Entertaining his fellow patients really helped him discover his joy of performing. Ray left Warm Springs with arm and leg braces and a slight limp that he would have for the rest of his life. But there was a silver lining. He was invited to perform on a telethon for polio, so the 19-year-old Ray Peterson made the 21-hour car trip from Denton to Los Angeles. In a bittersweet twist of fate, just as the budding singer arrived in Los Angeles, the vaccine for polio was successfully introduced, saving millions from the sort of debilitating teenage years he had while suffering from polio.
Today, the tragedy of paralytic polio can be prevented in individuals protected by all 3 recommended doses of polio vaccine. However, there are still millions of Americans who have received only 1 or 2 of the doses, or none at all. These are today's potential victims. Many are adults and preschool children. The shots are safe and painless. Take only a few seconds. There's no better way that you can use your time. You can avoid all the expense, suffering, and heartache that paralytic polio causes if you make use of the vaccine that is now available for adults as well as children.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Now, much like Jewel, Ray Peterson initially lived in his car, as he was determined to stay in Los Angeles and make it as a professional. To support himself, he worked at IBM during the day, and he entered singing contests in local clubs at night. At one such club, the singer met Stanley Schulman, who, in short order, became his manager and eventual business partner, with the two going on to form Dunes Records. A man with connections, Stan Schulman set up multiple meetings to try to get Ray a recording contract, and the skinny young singer impressed RCA, who signed him in the fall of 1957. He joined the stellar roster of RCA artists in the 50s like Eartha Kitt, Harry Belafonte, Perry Como, Louis Armstrong, and Elvis Presley.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
At his first session at Radio Recorders Studio B on October 14th, 1957, Ray recorded a version of Fever, previously recorded by Little Willie John.
When you kiss me, fever, when you hold me tight.
The song, and its flip side, We're Old Enough to Cry,
We're old enough to cry.
showed off his unique vocal flutterings. Although he would sing Fever on Ed Sullivan's CBS variety program, The Toast of the Town, his version didn't make the charts. It would be Peggy Lee who would enjoy a number 8 pop hit with her cover of the song.
When you kiss me, fever, when you hold me tight.
Still looking for his breakthrough hit, Ray Peterson recorded 3 songs written by Joanne Belvin during a January 20th, 1958 session. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't take a chapter to talk about the singing and songwriting duo of Joanne and Jesse Belvin, so let's take a little side journey into their story. Even if the name Jesse Belvin doesn't ring a bell with you, you're actually unknowingly aware of his work. In 1954, a song co-written by Jesse Belvin,
Earth angel, will you be mine?
was recorded by the Penguins and reached number 8 on the Billboard Singles Chart. It stands as one of the greatest songs of the decade and one of the most beautiful love songs ever written, going on to be a vital part of Back to the Future. Although Belvin had no small amount of subsequent R&B success over the next few years, with 1956's Good Night My Love,
Good night, my love.
he struck out for a new record label and a new sound in 1959. Guided by his wife and manager, Joanne Belvin, Jesse found a home on the RCA Victor imprint and attempted to recast himself as a crooner, something a bit closer to a Nat King Cole type. Late in 1959, Belvin released his first LP for the label, Just Jesse Belvin. It featured the singer floating over sharp arrangements by the likes of Shorty Rogers, who would later go on to arrange Daydream Believer by the Monkees, and was heavy on contemporary orchestral pop. With the release of Just Jesse Belvin, RCA was very clearly aiming to capture the hearts and minds of the coveted white audience of the late 1950s. And there was one song that stood apart for 2 reasons. For one, it was an original composition by Joanne Belvin, and for another, it perfectly encapsulated an artist in transition. Guess Who started as a love letter from Joanne to Jesse and was released in February 1959.
That was someone who cares is me.
The single made its first appearance on the Billboard Hot 100 chart on March 30th, 1959, and it began a slow climb up both the Hot 100 and R&B charts, where it peaked during the week of April 20th, number 33 on the Hot 100 and number 7 on R&B charts. Newly motivated by the moderate success of Guess Who, Jesse Belvin returned to the studio in late 1959 to record what would become his second studio LP, Mr. Easy. Notably, Guess Who earned Belvin 2 Grammy Award nominations in 1959. Best Vocal Performance, where he lost to Frank Sinatra, and Best Rhythm and Blues Performance, where he lost to Dinah Washington. On February 6, 1960, Jesse Belvin performed a show in Little Rock, Arkansas, on the same bill as Jackie Wilson and Marv Johnson. The show was Little Rock's first, with an integrated audience. Belvin reportedly received at least 6 death threats prior to the concert. Belvin rarely called home from the road, and never more than once a month, but he phoned his mother twice in the 3 days preceding the concert, each time worried about the hostile receptions he received. The show had to be stopped twice because of whites shouting racial slurs and urging the white teenagers present to leave. It was while leaving Little Rock, less than 4 hours after the performances, that Belvin and his wife were involved in a head-on automobile crash. Jesse died instantly. He was 27 years old, yet is always left out of any mention in the 27 Club, while Joanne drifted in and out of a coma until she passed a few days later at the age of 23. The legendary Etta James was high on Jesse Belvin. She bluntly called him the most gifted of all. Even now I consider him the greatest singer of my generation. Rhythm and blues, rock and roll, crooner, you name it. He was going to be bigger than Sam Cooke, bigger than Nat King Cole. In the book Dream Boogie, The Triumph of Sam Cooke, Peter Gerlach talked about how the Belvins died. There had been several death threats on Belvin prior to the concert, and there was speculation that Belvin's car had been tampered with prior to the accident. The Norfolk Journal and Guide ran a headline, "Did Racism Kill Jesse Belvin?" Says Gerlach, it was the same old ugly Peckerwood story. The show was booked to play a segregated dance, and when Jackie refused to do a second show for whites, after a hot dispute with the dance manager, Wilson and his group were allegedly ordered out of town at gunpoint. Investigators believed that disgruntled white fans were responsible for slashing Belvin's tires, a conclusion bolstered by the rumor that both Jackie and Arthur Prysock suffered problems as they drove to their next date in Dallas. The Louisiana Weekly reported that shortly after the death of the Belvins, Jackie Wilson, Arthur Prysock, and Larry Williams performed in New Orleans. The commotion started when Larry Williams attempted to sing from a sitting position at the edge of the stage. A black policeman informed them that it was against the auditorium policy to sing from the floor, and then a white officer allegedly pushed him. Williams was never one to avoid a confrontation, but it was Jackie Wilson, a former boxer, who at this point jumped from the stage and pushed the policeman, followed by 5 members of the band. There was no question in the mind of anyone in the crowd as to who provoked the confrontation, and bottles and bricks began to fly. As patrons scrambled for the exit, auditorium officials got the fire hoses ready, and 10 patrol wagons came blaring their sirens towards the scene. Jackie, who never even got to perform, was bailed out at 3 in the morning and promptly left town. But the bitterness lingered on all sides. Some of the performers grumbled that none of this would be happening if the white men would leave them alone. Others quipped that Jackie and Larry were so damn hot-headed that they just brought this upon themselves. In Jackie Wilson, Lonely Teardrops, by Tony Douglas, the night was described as such. They had police lined up all around the stage. Larry Williams had his foot on the piano like Little Richard, and he was doing Dizzy Miss Lizzie, and he ran onto the edge of the stage but didn't jump off. He got down off the stage and women came forward. White women. Jackie was standing backstage, and the cops took Larry and pulled him into the audience and started beating him with their sticks. Jackie came from backstage like he was Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. When he hit the floor, he was like a little rabbit. He went down on his knees, and when he came up, like he does on stage, he hit this cop, a big red cop. So they beat Jackie and nearly killed him. When we finally pulled him out and had to take him to the hospital, they took him to jail and we got him out. It took us a matter of minutes to get out of town, and they had his picture in the paper where he hit the cop. The riot received coverage in the newspapers, which stated that the police laid charges which ranged from attempted murder to assaulting police and inciting a riot. And I think it's really telling that white people get to write songs about car crashes, wherein black people in the same time period were having their cars tampered with, causing actual car accidents. But let's reel it back a bit and talk about Ray Peterson's relationship with the Belvins.
Ladies and gentlemen, a great artist, Mr. Ray Peterson!
According to Ray Peterson, Belvin's tender emotional technique had a major impact on his own emerging style. "I have been influenced by many people when it comes to my music," he told writer Gary Sorkin. "If I could choose who had the greatest influence on me, I would say Jesse Belvin." Both Belvins wrote Let's Try Romance for Ray Peterson.
Let's try romance.
2 more sessions followed in June of 1958, resulting in Patricia.
And Picky Sue is jealous too.
And the flip side, My Blue-Eyed Baby, was recorded at a session a few days earlier.
My blue-eyed baby.
Despite all the studio activity, Peterson didn't score with anything remotely resembling a hit until he recorded the romantic ballad The Wonder of You.
The wonder of you.
Baker Knight wrote this song with Peterson's label mate Perry Como in mind. Baker Knight had already penned a massive hit with Lonesome Town,
And they call it Lonesome Town,
for Ricky Nelson. And when Knight met Peterson, he completely forgot about Perry Como and offered him the song instead. Backed by the Shorty Rogers Orchestra, the tune was just what Peterson needed, and starting May 18, 1959, the record spent 16 weeks on the pop chart, peaking at number 25. Now that he had a hit record on the chart, Ray's career took a big step forward, and live performance dates in bigger venues crowded his calendar. His limited mobility caused by polio presented a problem, and he practiced long hours training himself to move on stage as gracefully as possible. His next hit, at the start of 1960, was the cover of the British hit, What Do You Want to Make Those Eyes at Me For?
What do you wanna make those eyes at me for?
Which had just spent several weeks at number 1 in Britain for Emile Ford and the Checkmates. And the B-side, Answer Me, My Love,
Answer me, oh my love,
became his second appearance on the UK charts, with The Wonder of You being first. Then, Mark Dinnan came out with the chart-topping smash hit Teen Angel,
Teen Angel, Teen Angel,
and the floodgates opened on the teenage tragedy genre. Ray Peterson was the first artist, post-Dinning, to cash in on the big craze with Tell Laura I Love Her.
tell Laura I love her.
Written by future co-writer of Leader of the Pack, Jeff Barry, and by, I shit you not, the writer of Ben Raleigh. His stirring vocals, approaching tearfulness, told of unrequited youthful romance leading to a grisly demise, and the record became his first top 10 hit. It also proved to be Jeff Barry's first verified hit as well. The lyrics of Tell Laura I Love Her originally concerned a rodeo and not an automobile race, as composer Jeff Barry was an aficionado of cowboy culture. Telling Chicken Soup for the Soul in their book, The Story Behind the Song, I wrote the song in 1959. I didn't even own a car then. I was a Brooklyn cowboy. When I sat down to write this song, I originally saw it as a sign for a cash prize for winning a rodeo. Not many people know that there was a rodeo every year in Brooklyn of all places, and I went regularly. I played the first version of the song from my very first publisher, Arnold Shaw, and he said, "That's interesting, but the guy is gored to death by a Brahma bull? Who could relate to that?" That was obviously true, so I changed it. Stock Car Race had the same 3 syllables as rodeo, and still fit the melody, and more importantly, people could relate to it. Tell Laura I Love Her is the tragic story of a young man named Tommy who is desperately in love with Laura. He wants to marry her, so he enters a stock car race, hoping to win and use the prize money to buy Laura a wedding ring. The second verse tells how his car was overturned and burst into flames. Tommy is fatally injured, and his last words are, "Tell Laura I love her. My love for her will never die." In the final verse, Laura prays inside the chapel, where a church organ is heard, and where she could still hear Tommy's voice crooning out the titular "Tell Laura I Love Her" before it fades out. Decca Records in England decided to not release Ray Peterson's 1960 recording on the grounds that it was too tasteless and vulgar, and destroyed about 25,000 copies that had already been pressed. A cover version by Ricky Valance, released by EMI on the Columbia label,
Tell Laura I love her.
was number 1 on the UK single charts for 3 weeks. Valance's version was initially banned by BBC, who considered it to be in bad taste and expressed concern for copycat activity. Peterson's single was re-released in 1962, following the success of Valance's recording. In the US, a recording by Johnny T. Angel, aka Bill Gillian, on Bell Records peaked at number 94 on June 20th, 1974.
Tell Laura I love her.
In 1973, Dutch singer Albert West released his 7-inch version, which reached number 8 on the Dutch Top 40.
Tell Laura I love her.
In 1974, Creation released a version which peaked at number 20 in the Australian charts.
Tell Laura I love her.
The story and song was adapted for stage and turned into Tell Laura I Love Her, the musical, in 2007 by Richard C. Haig. Spanish versions were recorded by Chilean singer Ray Pallavicino in 1962.
Dile a Laura que la quiero.
By Mexican singer Cesar Costa.
Dile que la quiero.
And Spanish group Los HH in 1963.
Dile que la quiero.
There were also versions in Serbian by Miodrag Jevromovic,
Laura ja te volim.
Danish by Heaven,
Is Lily and Khalid.
Finnish by Hector French,
Oi Laura suoca I pan.
Italian by Michel,
Dite a Laura che l'amo.
and Swedish by Carly Tornehave. An answer song, Tell Tommy I Miss Him, was released by Marilyn Michaels in 1960. It was originally released by RCA Victor Records as a single and is included in the 2000 compilation album The Answer to Everything, which had songs like Just Tell Him Jane Said Hello,
Just tell him Jane said hello.
a response to Just Tell Her Jim Said Hello,
Just tell her Jim said hello.
I'm No Runaround, in response to Runaround Sue,
I keep away from a runaround Sue.
Jerry, parentheses, I'm Your Sherry, in response to Sherry,
Sherry, can you come out tonight?
Queen of the House,
Comes home to Queen of the House.
in response to King of the Road,
Man of means by no means, king of the road.
Yes, I'm Lonesome Tonight,
Yes, I'm lonesome tonight.
in response to Are You Lonesome Tonight,
Are you lonesome tonight?
not just tomorrow, but always,
Not just tomorrow, but always.
in response to Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, I'll Be There,
And darling, darling, I'll be there.
in response to Stand By Me,
Darling, darling, stand by me.
Duchess of Earl,
'Cause I'm the Duchess of Earl.
in response to Duke of Earl,
'Cause I'm the Duke of Earl.
Well, I Told You, in response to Hit the Road Jack, When a Woman Loves a Man,
When a woman loves a man.
in response to When a Man Loves a Woman, Tell Tommy I Miss Him,
Tell Tommy I love him.
in response to Tell Laura I Love Her,
Tell Laura I love her.
and They Took You Away, I'm Glad, I'm Glad,
I'm happy they took you away. Ha ha! I'm happy they took you away.
in response to They're Coming to Take Me Away, haha.
They're coming to take me away, haha. They're coming to take me away, ho ho.
Ray Peterson later moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and by the 70s, when the hit records stopped, he became a Baptist church minister and occasionally played the oldies music circuit. In 1981, he released a Christian folk rock album called My Father's Place. Peterson was inducted into the Rockabilly Hall of Fame, and a fun fact about me is that my papa, Rex Hunt, is also in the Rockabilly Hall of Fame. On January 25th, 2005, at his home in Smyrna, Tennessee, a suburb of Nashville, Ray Peterson passed away from cancer. He left behind a wife, Claudia, 7 children, and 9 grandchildren. Tell Laura I Love Her comes in at a BPM of 102. Tell Laura I Love Her is just one of those songs where you can feel the anguish seeping through the vocals and the lyrics. We've all had a love that we would just absolutely do anything for, and just like Leader of the Pack was the deadliest example of outside forces interfering with your relationship, Tell Laura I Love Her is the deadliest example of being willing to do anything for the one you love. This week's Love Homework is easily the most heartbreaking song ever written. A song written shortly after the death of Canadian artist and musician Genevieve Castret. Her husband, Phil Avillerum, under the pseudonym Mount Erie, bears his broken heart and soul on the song Real Death.
Crusted with tears, catatonic and raw.
As I do with every episode that features an artist that has passed, I will cast the biopic. So for the Ray Peterson biopic, I think the perfect fit would be British actor Adam Campbell. If you like what you learned here today, please consider dropping a like. It would also be tremendous if you could subscribe and ring the bell. I drop a new episode every Friday. Until next time, my name is Richard Hunt, and you heard it in a love song.
Top 5 songs about death. Alora's dad tribute list. Okay? Okay. Leader of the Pack. The guy fucking beefs it on his motorcycle and dies, right? Dead Man's Curve, Jan and Dean.
Do you know that right after they recorded that song, Jan himself crashed his...
It was Dean, you fucking idiot.
It was Jan. It was a long time after this.
Okay, whatever. Tell Laura I love her. That would bring the house down. Laura's mom could sing it.